Our next session, From Morality to Materiality, the business case for talking about climate. Please welcome to the stage, Head of Content at the Cool Down, Eric Ash, President, Potential Energy.
Good to see you guys. I'll tell you one thing, this is a brave audience. Thursday afternoon, the last day of Climate Week, and you're still here with relative smiles on your face. Well done, very impressive. I'm just gonna take a few minutes to talk about who we are, and then I'm gonna share some data with you, and then Anna from the Cool Down is gonna come up and we're gonna have a conversation here to the side. So a little bit about Potential Energy. We talk about ourselves as a narrative change organization. A lot of people think of us as an advertising agency or an ad firm. We're more of a marketing firm, but we really focus on narrative change for climate. And so what that means is we try to identify through research and data what topics, phrases, terminology, narrative territories work to move and shift opinions on climate change. That takes lots of different forms. Sometimes it takes the form of a marketing campaign or advertising. Lots of times it takes the form of working with other partner organizations to give people the information that will make them more effective. We do a lot with leaders in the space, so we help advise individuals who are looking to shape policy and to shape narratives around policies. And then we spend a lot of time with other brands and other categories that are really looking to navigate, like how do they talk about climate in a way that leads to affinity and issue salience and reduces backlash. This takes a lot of different forms I mentioned before, and so we have a lot of data, tons of data. We've exposed consumers to essentially we're closer to 4 billion impressions on the issue. We do a lot in controlled labs, which is in the real world, but essentially like a smaller universe where we can identify what are the economics around a pro-climate message versus a con. We do lots of work with consumers in the field. We do lots of longitudinal surveys of how are we shaping perceptions over time. Lots and lots of time to understand like what is working and what's not working. We also have our own brands. So we do direct to consumer in many cases so that we can help change the local environment in the states and at the national level. And so one of those brands is called Science Moms. And so this is a brand where we are focused on moderate women that happen to be moms. And it comes from a group of individuals who are world-renowned scientists. They're at academic institutions across the US. They happen to be moms as well. Moms turn out to be a very trusted source for talking about climate, and so do scientists as well. And so I want to share with you just one example of the kind of work that we do. This is a spot from a brand called Science Mom. So if you could go ahead and play that spot for me.
As a scientist, I know by the time she takes her first breath, 9 billion more tons of carbon pollution will be in the air. When she takes her first steps, wildfires will have burned millions more acres she could have explored. The day she gets her first pet, there are thousands of newly extinct species she'll never meet. The night she forgets to call, the night of her first heartbreak. Her future home floods for the first of many times. By the time a child born today goes to college, it may be too late to leave them the world we promised. Our window to act on climate change is like watching them grow up. We blink and we miss it.
So a little snippet about how we bring this to life in a meaningful way, very consumer-centric, very much focused on, let me catch up to where I am. Can you go back one slide, please? Sorry, the other way. Just go back there you go. And so let me go a click deeper now into talking about the things that you actually care about and how we engage, particularly if you're from a for-profit and you represent the business sector. How do we talk about climate in a way that actually brings people to the table and doesn't alienate them? A question I get a lot, particularly in the environment we're in right now, is like, do people actually care about climate? How could they care about climate when there's so much swirl going on? There's so many issues at stake. It feels like we're coming off the rails as a society sometimes. And so you may be prone to think like, actually people really don't care about climate. Well, let's look at the data. This is from our friends at Yale, and they've been collecting data on one of the many data points is the consumer worry about climate, the adult population in the US. And so on the far left, if you can't read that, that's November 2008. So if you look at the top two box score for adults in the US, they're concerned about climate, it's roughly 62%. That number has remained static for the most part. So all the way to the right, the last data point was May 2025, we're at 65%. The one thing that has changed, if you can see the dark box below, that's the very concerned versus, or very worried versus somewhat worried, which is actually almost doubled from 2008 all the way to 2025. So in the midst of all the chaos, in the midst of all the swirl, people are still very concerned. They're growing more concerned with climate change. Well, you may say, great, they're concerned. We can't really convince them. We can't build the narratives that actually will pull people in and get them to pay attention. The data tells us something different. So this is when we look back at all the information and all the data that we've collected over the years, the baseline for overall support, we just picked these different categories as an example, remains somewhere around the 50% mark. And so we did a bunch of research in that controlled lab setting to identify what are the most effective cons, like what drives down issue salience and concern. And you can see when our competition shows up, they can drastically reduce and drive down concern. But you can also see when we show up, we can significantly increase pro support, these narratives. And so people are concerned. There is a way to win. Now, if you're cynical, like I am, you might be like, that's great. I'm sure that's being driven primarily through Democrats. You can't really convince Republicans or right-leaning individuals. What's the data say? Data says we can. In fact, Republicans largely are more movable on the topic than Democrats. For you data geeks, you know that's probably because we have more room. The liberal side or the left-leaning side it's hard to raise that issue with them. Republicans are movable on this. So then your question is like, well, why? People are concerned. We can win the narrative. Republicans actually movable. Why aren't we moving more people? Short answer is they're not hearing about it. In fact, the share of voice on the topic in the marketplace has dramatically gone down just since 2021. People are not talking about climate change. So let's go click deeper into what you probably care about is, well, how do I navigate this? It's fairly polarized. It's getting more polarized. It feels like it's a political topic. How can we talk about this? Well, the short story is it doesn't have to be. So we've done a bunch of research over the past several years on how to talk about this topic from a business perspective and actually worked with corporations and sectors to identify what is a safe place to talk about this. We've talked with consumers, we've talked to consumers in other countries, focusing on the G6, we've talked to CMOs, lots and lots of data research. And if you don't remember anything else that I share with you, I'm gonna share with you right now the secret sauce. It's materiality over morality. This is your safe space. If you don't remember anything else, if you move towards a story around materiality and stay away from morality, you're going to get a lot more interest and engagement, and there's an open door for you. So I want to talk a little bit about what this looks like. I've got 5 main points here. Number 1, consumer expectations remain very high in this arena. And when we ask consumers, if a company says they're investing in clean energy or reducing their carbon population, 6 to 1 consumers say they are more rather than less likely to buy from them, to see them as leaders, and to speak well of them. There's another slide here I didn't include, which shows that over half of consumers expect businesses to invest in clean energy to reduce their carbon population. The majority of people are expecting businesses to make this move. The affinity for those businesses go up. It's a safe space. Point number 2, you probably have experienced this firsthand. Morality message leads to significant backlash, particularly from our right-leaning friends. This quote is an example that we hear time and time and time again. There are too many people that are trying to force their opinions down other people's throats. You've probably learned this the hard way, as I have in my career. Like, people don't want to be told what to do. Freedom and responsibility is a pillar, particularly in these times. So number 2, morality messaging leads to massive backfire. Number 3, audiences see climate as material already. They already see this as a material issue versus a morality issue. So when we asked about these industries and we asked consumers, we looked at the percentage of consumers who think that these industries are currently impacted by a climate-related factor. Over 86% of people think that these business sectors are already impacted by this issue. And then we asked them, 60% of consumers think each industry faces significant clean energy opportunities that could possibly impact their bottom line. We think this number is actually higher, but when we were talking to consumers, we think they may have had a hard time mapping back how clean energy will actually help these sectors. But the short story is there's permission, they expect you to do it, and they think it's going to benefit you and your bottom line. 4th point, this may be obvious now, don't say ESG. No one knows what it says, what it means. Acronyms typically feel like insider baseball. And so we ask consumers, What do you think it means? My favorite one here is we think it means eggs, sausage, and grits, maybe? It's not effective. It is laden with an agenda. It doesn't speak the language of how this is going to benefit me. And so the place that you need to get to that is going to be more productive is say responsible business instead. This is the safe place to be in terms of how you frame the issue if you were a for-profit entity in a business. I love this quote over here. We asked them, what does this mean to you? Making money while taking care of employees and customers. What an awesome place for a business to be. It's a safe space. What's also super interesting is we asked individuals based on their political persuasion, like when you hear the term responsible business, do you associate this with a conservative agenda or with a more liberal agenda? And you can see up at the top box, progressives are like, oh, that's us talking to ourselves. But also at the very bottom, 43% of conservatives say, oh, that's us talking about ourselves. It's a win-win for both parties. It's a wide open space to step into. And so when in doubt, fifth point, when we look at how to use every word that we say about this actually matters. We have a document on our website. It says Talk Like a Human. It gives very tactical, practical advice on what language to use, what language to avoid. When we say things like establish strong governance practices, what we need to say instead is we need to hold our leaders accountable. When we say things like we need to manage human capital, which is a very buzzy, in the tent, like climate thing to say, what people need to hear is we need to take care of our employees. We are marketers, and if you are a marketer in the crowd, you know, like we have to speak the language to our audience to signal to them that we care about them, we identify them. The more we can decode the language, when we use the right terminology, there's a significant lift in people who come to our side of the table in the conversation. So quick recap before we shift to a little conversation. Consumers' expectations on companies remain high. You have permission. They think you're doing this anyway. Step into that space. Morality is the place to avoid. Materiality is the place where you have a safe haven. For consumers, the conversation is all about materiality. It's the same for investors. That percentage number for investors expecting that companies are actually moving into space is a lot higher than just your average consumer. Responsible business is the right term as opposed to ESG. And when in doubt, talk like a human. Meet people where they are, identify where they are, have just a smidge of empathy for what the decisions they're making, and try to adjust your language proactively before you engage with them. All right, so I'm gonna invite Anna on from the cool down, and we're gonna have a seat and pick up the conversation over here. Hey, hey. You're here?
Yeah.
All right, perfect.
All right. Hey, Eric.
Hello again.
I love this research. I mean, we speak the same language, right, at the cool down, trying to be a little more disruptive, right? Because we need to do things a little bit differently. You know, we hear so much about how divided we are and how polarized we are. I know you live in Florida, so you're in the heart of, you know, a lot of different opinions. But the research that that you've just presented and that we're going to dig into a little bit here may say something different. Maybe we're not as polarized as everybody makes it out to be. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a keen insight. If you think about how we're experiencing life in America and on this planet today, it's hard. Everybody agrees that something is changing and something is different. And if we can talk about where we have the common ground. So one example in Florida is when I first moved to Florida from DC, I had this conversation and people were asking, hey, what do you do? And as I started to talk about the issue, one of my best friends that I grew up with my entire life said, when I hear you talk about climate, I just want to punch you in the head. And I was like, what did I say? And he went through and listed all of the buzzword language I was using. Yeah. And I had no idea that what I was communicating to him was I had an agenda and I wanted to force an opinion on them. And so what I started to do was I just listened. And I heard people around me in my community say things like, it sure is a lot hotter than it used to be. That was the gateway for me to engage and have a conversation on things that they were actually concerned about versus an ideology that I unintentionally was signaling that I want to communicate to them. And so when you get to the political sphere, obviously this is a wedge issue. It's been weaponized. The more we can actually meet people where they are and talk about the things that are affecting them in the real world, that's where we have the safe space. And people are willing to talk about it. The data consistently reflects that regardless if you're a Republican or a Democrat or somewhere in the middle, you are movable on this issue as long as we talk about things that they care about.
Yeah, well, I live in Utah, so I know exactly what you're talking about, and yeah, there's so much more that unites us. And so if there's largely consensus around what's happening and that we need to do something about it, The real issue is communication, and that's why we started the cool down 3 years ago. It's, when you think about climate solutions, you don't necessarily think about communication, but it's a huge one that we need to unlock to solve this. So how are you guys working to solve that issue?
Yeah, the issue is scale and distribution. It's a significant challenge. And so if you recall the slides, I know I went through that rather quickly. We know that people are open to it. We know that people are concerned. In fact, they're growing and they're very worried about climate. So it is an issue of salience. We know that we can develop the right narratives, and we know that all parties are movable. They're not seeing and hearing from us enough. And so what we're trying to do is build our scale aggressively. And so building our scale aggressively and competing for that market share in 2025 and beyond looks different. So we are building a rapid response machine. We are working very hard and diligently to understand how do we manipulate and hack the algorithm the way that our competition has over the past few years. But it really requires partnership with groups that give us reach and frequency. It requires working with platforms, with other organizations, with people that have a channel of distribution, and it requires a commitment from investors as well.
Yep, and those trusted messengers. Let's talk a little bit about how businesses can and should be talking about sustainability and climate, because I think a lot of people are nervous about talking about these things. At the same time, we know that consumers are demanding them. Investors and shareholders want companies to be making responsible business decisions that are focused on resilience. So how can people, give us some simple ways marketers can talk about this without getting canceled?
Yeah, and it's funny because a conversation I was having earlier today, we were having this exact conversation, and someone said to me, well, there this distinction between morality and letting your values as a company show through, and I do see them as a slightly different bucket. And so you have been under pressure, many of you, to take a stance on moral issues and to have a point of view, and it's very clear from the data, from your own experience, that is not welcome. It's seen as an overreach. It's seen as a business trying to force an agenda. Now, but what you get, if you picked up on some of the terminology, is when you do the right thing, when you are responsible and you're making choices, you're being responsible for waste. You're being responsible for what you have around you. There's a value that is attached to that everyone identifies with and they see. And you can see from some of the quotes, when people see that companies are doing what they can to reduce their pollution and their carbon footprint, it's good for the business, it's good for their employees, and it's good for the consumer as well. And so it works very, very, very hard for you to get the credibility that you're doing the right thing. They expect you to do it already. And I also think something that I would encourage companies to consider is, we know from the data that when narratives get planted, particularly if it's disinformation, it's economically very hard to unseed those narratives. You're seeing this and experiencing this as well. And so I would encourage businesses to think about how can they be proactive to plant this flag on your terms and go to the space that is safe so that you can get credit for and defend yourself against any attacks that may come your way.
Yeah. I think one of the most helpful things is the really specific examples of what words to use or not use. I thought it was really interesting in the report. You wrote about clean energy. Effectively communicating the clean energy opportunity means telling a new story, a story of addition and upgrading, a story of abundance, more than the replacement or elimination of fossil fuels, progress, change, transformation. I thought that was really interesting because the climate world has talked so much about needing to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels, which of course we do, but perhaps there's a different frame that could unlock a little bit more broad appeal around the clean energy space, for example.
Yes, I'm a big believer, we are a big believer of the abundance strategy. I mean, you can also see when these decisions are framed as a ban and people interpret sort of an attempt to make progress as a ban on eating burgers, or you're gonna take my gas cars away, people do not respond well to that. I don't respond well to that. I wanna be able to make my own choices. And so the benefit of the clean energy movement and the transition, it's cheaper than it's ever been before. It makes smart business, and people want the freedom to choose. There is a freedom to step into this space. Affordability is going to be a major issue ongoing in the United States. Insurance rates are going to skyrocket. I think it's a ripe place for us to step into that space to say, you deserve the freedom to choose cleaner, cheaper energy. It exists for you. And so the demand for those options are right in front of us. I think there will be more opportunity for us to create that demand.
Yeah, we see that all the time with the bans. I mean, they just do not work from a consumer standpoint, in all of our content. But when we talk about the fact that, 13% of childhood asthma cases are caused by having a gas stove in the home, works a lot better than saying there's a ban on gas stoves. So I think there's a lot there. in terms of specific examples of language, and also, drawing upon your Talk Like a Human report, which is so important. I mean, that's what, a lot of people don't realize, that a lot of this has gotten overcomplicated on purpose because, to make people feel overwhelmed. So what are some examples of that? We saw the egg, sausage, and grits, right? Where people just can simplify, and that can make all the difference.
Yeah, pollution's a great space for that. It's something that people experience, that they see. So we talk about reducing carbon emissions. This was my example I made earlier. I'm sure I used some sort of "we're going to reduce the carbon footprint" language, which makes sense to me, where my friends were ID'd me as somebody with a very liberal woke agenda. But when we talk about pollution and the impact pollution is having, and the fact that the climate is heating up, and in particular in places like Florida, where not just the hurricanes are getting worse, the red tide is getting worse, the ability for people to can maintain their rhythms, the fact that the Gulf of Mexico is hotter than it's ever been. I believe the hottest years on record have been the past 5 to 6 years. If I can engage in those topics that they are experiencing that matter to them, and now we start to talk about things like insurance and how it's the materiality. The materiality space is a very safe space to move into. And again, talking about the things that we are actually experiencing. Decarbonization, I don't even know what that means half the time. Expecting someone who's not steeped into the language to identify with that and then feel like it's an open space is a very high bar.
Yeah.
I think we have to meet people where they are, talk about the things that matter to them, talk about the materiality. That's the safe space.
Yeah, and remember that we're in the field, but regular people are not. So
right.
Simplifying. Okay, and finally, what are brands leaving on the table by not talking about these things?
I think they're missing an opportunity to get ahead of the curve. And so I do think this idea of taking credit for the things that you're actually doing already, I think you can actually start to win over individuals that may not think about you and your brand as doing the right thing, but clearly they're asking you to do that. And so I think it's a really safe space to engage on your terms, to tell your story. Again, I think taking a proactive step to plant the flag, to talk about what you're doing from a materiality standpoint is only going to engender support and love from your consumers.
Right, so no green hushing, just talk smarter.
Talk
and this
smarter.
Research is incredible. So go check it out. It's invaluable for brands. And thanks, Eric,
Thank you very much for having me
here.
Thank you, guys.